The sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked earth as Samuel Sam Hartwell guided his mare through the endless expanse of the Sonoran Desert. His weathered hands gripped the reins loosely, years of riding having taught him to trust his horse's instincts more than his own weary eyes. The year was 1858, and Sam had been riding alone for 3 months, ever since the incident in Tucson that had forced him to leave civilization behind. He was a man carved from the same unforgiving stone as the desert itself, tall, lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. A week's worth of stubble covered his jaw, and his clothes bore the dust of countless miles. The only sounds were the rhythmic clip-clop of horseshoes against hardpan and the whisper of wind through sparse mesquite. Sam had been many things in his 32 years, a soldier in the Mexican-American War, a cattle rancher, a sometime lawman. But mostly, he'd been running. From his past, from his mistakes, from the ghosts that followed him across the frontier. Today, he was running low on water and hope. It was the vultures that caught his attention first. 3 of them circled lazily against the bleached sky, their shadows painting dark crosses on the desert floor. Sam's mare, Belle, snorted nervously and shied sideways. Something was wrong. In this godforsaken wilderness, vultures meant death, and death meant trouble he couldn't afford. But as Sam crested a small rise, what he saw defied explanation. A single wooden post stood like a monument to cruelty in the middle of nowhere, its base surrounded by wind-carved stones. Tied to that post was a woman, a young black woman, her head hanging forward in unconsciousness or exhaustion. Even from a distance, Sam could see her condition, heavily pregnant, her dress torn and sun-bleached, her dark skin glistening with perspiration. Sam's first instinct was to ride away. He'd learned the hard way that getting involved in other people's troubles usually meant acquiring troubles of his own. But something held him, perhaps the memory of his sister Sarah, lost to consumption 3 years ago, or maybe just the simple recognition that no living thing deserved to die alone in this wasteland. He dismounted slowly, his hand instinctively checking the Colt Navy revolver at his hip. The desert was full of traps, and this felt like one. As he approached, the woman stirred, lifting her head with tremendous effort. Her eyes, deep brown and filled with a mixture of fear and desperate hope, met his. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry as autumn leaves. "Please don't leave me." Sam knelt beside her, his knife already cutting through the hemp ropes that bound her wrists and ankles. The rope was new, the knots professionally tied. Someone had meant for her to die here slowly. "Easy now," Sam murmured, catching her as she slumped forward. "I've got you." Her name was Patience, a name that seemed both fitting and ironic given her circumstances. As Sam helped her drink water from his canteen in careful sips, she told him her story in fragments, her voice growing stronger with each word. She had been the property of Marcus Caldwell, a wealthy plantation owner who'd moved his operation to the Arizona Territory when the political winds began shifting in the east. Unlike many of her fellow slaves, Patience could read and write, skills taught to her secretly by Caldwell's late wife, who died of fever the previous winter. "Master Caldwell, he forced himself on me," Patience said, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. "When his new wife arrived from Charleston and saw my condition, she demanded I be disposed of." The euphemism hung in the air like smoke. Sam understood. He'd seen enough cruelty in his years to know that some people viewed other human beings as less than livestock. "They brought me out here 3 days ago," Patience continued. "Said the desert would claim me quick, that it was more merciful than other methods." Sam's jaw tightened. 3 days without water in this heat should have killed her. That she'd survived spoke to a strength of will that impressed him more than any gunfighter's quick draw. "Well," Sam said, helping her to her feet, "they were wrong about the desert claiming you. Question is, where do we go from here?" It was then that Patience delivered the first shock that would change everything. "We can't go north," she said urgently. "They'll be waiting. But there's something you need to know. I ain't the only one who escaped." Sam frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's a whole network, Mr. Hartwell. People helping folks like me get to freedom. They call it the Underground Railroad, but out here, it's more like the Desert Railroad. And Master Caldwell, he's been hunting it down, killing anyone he suspects of helping." The name hit Sam like a physical blow. "How do you know my name?" Patience smiled for the first time, and despite her condition, Sam glimpsed the beauty that had caught a monster's attention. Because, Sam Hartwell, you're supposed to be dead. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sam's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Patience raised her hands peacefully. 3 months ago, in Tucson, she said, you shot down Marcus Caldwell's son, David, in a fair fight. But Caldwell told everyone you murdered the boy in cold blood. Put a $500 bounty on your head. Dead or alive. Sam's mind raced. David Caldwell, young, arrogant, faster with his mouth than his gun. He'd been harassing a Mexican family outside a cantina, threatening to burn down their store unless the father handed over his daughter. Sam had intervened, words were exchanged, and the boy had drawn first. It was a clean shoot, witnessed by a dozen people. But apparently, Marcus Caldwell had enough money and influence to rewrite history. So why tell me this? Sam asked. Why warn someone who's supposed to be your enemy? Because, Patience said, struggling to stand straighter, the people in the network, they told me about you. They said you stood up for that Mexican family. Said you were one of the good ones. Sam helped her toward Belle, his mind working furiously. If Caldwell was hunting the Underground Railroad and had put a bounty on Sam's head, then saving Patience was about to complicate his life in ways he couldn't imagine. But as they prepared to mount up, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the desert. Riders, Sam said grimly, shading his eyes against the sun. 4 of them, coming fast. Patience's face went pale. It's them. It has to be. Sam's military training kicked in. The nearest cover was a cluster of red rocks about half a mile east, but Patience couldn't ride hard in her condition. The approaching riders would reach them in minutes. Can you shoot? Sam asked, checking his rifle. I can try. Sam handed her his backup pistol, a older single-action Army Colt. Point and pull. Don't think about it. The riders crested the rise like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, Marcus Caldwell himself in the lead, his silver hair gleaming beneath a black hat. Behind him rode 3 men Sam recognized as professional gunmen. Jake Morrison, a killer for hire with dead eyes and fast hands. Torres, a Mexican desperado who'd switched sides for Caldwell's gold. And Billy Creed, young and eager to prove himself with violence. Caldwell reined in 50 yards away, his pale eyes taking in the scene with cold calculation. He was a man accustomed to power, with the soft hands of someone who let others do his killing. But there was nothing soft about the hatred in his gaze. Well, well, Caldwell called out, his cultured southern accent carrying clearly across the distance. Sam Hartwell, the man who murdered my boy. And my runaway property. How convenient. Your boy drew first, Caldwell, Sam replied, positioning himself between the riders and Patience. And that woman isn't property. Not anymore. Caldwell's laugh was like the scrape of bone against stone. Oh, but she is, Mr. Hartwell. According to the Fugitive Slave Act, she's stolen goods. And you're harboring her, which makes you a criminal twice over. Sam felt Patience tense behind him. The law was indeed on Caldwell's side, at least technically. But Sam had stopped caring about technicalities the day he'd watched David Caldwell threaten to burn a family's home. Funny thing about the law, Sam said, his hand hovering near his gun. Sometimes it's wrong. Big words for a dead man, Jake Morrison spoke for the first time, his voice flat and emotionless. Caldwell's paying $500 for you breathing, $1,000 if you're not. I'm thinking 1,000 sounds better. The tension stretched taut as piano wire. Sam could feel sweat trickling down his back, but his hands remained steady. 4 against 1 were bad odds, but he'd faced worse in the war. The key was to make them spread out, deny them the advantage of coordinated fire. You boys sure you want to dance? Sam asked conversationally. Because I guarantee at least 2 of you won't be riding home. It was Billy Creed who broke first. Young and stupid and eager to impress. He went for his gun with a flourish that would have been impressive in a saloon but was suicidal in a real fight. Sam's Colt cleared leather smooth as silk, the shot echoing across the desert like thunder. Billy toppled from his saddle, clutching his shoulder and screaming. The others scattered, exactly as Sam had hoped. Torres spurred his horse left while Morrison went right. Caldwell, showing more wisdom than his hired guns, dropped from his saddle and took cover behind his horse. Sam grabbed Patience's hand and ran for the rocks, bullets whining overhead like angry wasps. Behind them, Belle whinnied in terror but held her ground. A good horse, worth more than gold in this country. The rocks provided decent cover, but Sam knew they were trapped. Torres and Morrison were experienced fighters who wouldn't make the same mistake as young Billy. They'd take their time, use the terrain, wait for the sun to work against their targets. "I'm sorry," Patience whispered, reloading the pistol with shaking hands. "This is my fault." "No," Sam said firmly, checking his ammunition. This started when Caldwell decided his money made him God. "We're just finishing it." For 20 minutes, they played a deadly game of cat and mouse among the rocks. Torres tried to flank them from the south while Morrison provided covering fire. Sam managed to wing Torres, sending him scrambling for better cover, but Morrison's rifle shots were getting closer. It was Patience who spotted the movement first, a flash of color among the rocks to their north. But instead of more of Caldwell's men, what emerged made Sam's heart leap with something between hope and disbelief. 3 riders approached at full gallop, a grizzled Mexican man with silver in his beard, a young white woman in men's clothing, and an elderly black man whose bearing suggested he'd been born free and intended to die the same way. They moved with military precision, spreading out to catch Caldwell's men in a crossfire. "Friends of yours?" Sam asked. Patience's smile was radiant. "The railroad." The newcomers changed everything. Morrison found himself caught between Sam's position and the Mexican rider's rifle. He tried to run and took a bullet through the chest for his trouble. Torres, already wounded, threw down his gun and raised his hands. Only Caldwell remained, crouched behind his trembling horse. The Mexican rider approached slowly, his rifle trained on Caldwell. Sam recognized him now, Jose Mendoza, a legend among the desert guides, a man who'd helped more escaped slaves reach freedom than any conductor on the actual Underground Railroad. "Marcus Caldwell," Jose called out in accented English. "Your reputation precedes you, senor. As does your cruelty." Caldwell stood slowly, his hands visible but not raised. He was a man accustomed to buying his way out of trouble. "I can pay you, Mendoza. Whatever these people offered you, I'll double it." Jose's laugh was warm but without humor. "Some things, they are not for sale." But Caldwell had one more card to play. His hand moved not toward his gun but toward his vest pocket, withdrawing a folded paper. "Before you do something you'll regret, perhaps you should know who you're protecting." He tossed the paper toward Sam, who caught it warily. It was a wanted poster, his own face staring back at him, offering $1,000 for his capture. But it wasn't the bounty that made his blood run cold. It was the charge, murder of Deputy Marshal Thomas Hendricks. "That's impossible," Sam said, but even as the words left his mouth, doubt crept in. Thomas Hendricks, Tommy, had been his best friend, his partner when they'd worn badges together in Tombstone. Tommy had been found shot dead 2 weeks after the incident with David Caldwell. "Oh, it's quite possible," Caldwell said smoothly. "You see, Deputy Hendricks was investigating my business affairs, getting too close to matters that weren't his concern. When he died, I made sure the evidence pointed to his old partner, the man who'd already proven himself a killer by murdering my son." The revelation hit Sam like a physical blow. Tommy was dead, and Caldwell had arranged it. Worse, he'd made Sam the scapegoat, ensuring that the law itself would hunt him down. Jose's rifle never wavered, but Sam could see uncertainty in the older man's eyes. $1,000 bounty was serious money, and harboring a wanted murderer was a hanging offense. It was Patience who broke the silence, struggling to her feet despite her condition. "He saved me," she said simply. "Whatever that paper says, I know what kind of man he is." "The girl's word against official documents," Caldwell said. "Which will you choose, Mendoza?" For a long moment, the only sound was the desert wind. Then Jose smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I choose justice, senor. And justice, she has many faces." The shot came from the young woman, Sarah Hutchins, as Sam would later learn. Her bullet took Caldwell center mass, spinning him around and dropping him to the sand. He wasn't dead, but he wouldn't be riding anywhere soon. "That was for Deputy Hendricks," Sarah said calmly, lowering her smoking rifle. "And for every person you've hurt in the name of your twisted idea of order." Sam stared at her. "You knew Tommy? Knew him? Hell, I was going to marry him." Sarah's voice was steady, but Sam could see the pain behind her eyes. "He came to me 2 weeks before he died, said he'd found evidence that could put Caldwell away forever. Evidence of murder, torture, worse things than you can imagine." The pieces began falling into place. Tommy hadn't just been investigating Caldwell's treatment of slaves. He'd uncovered something bigger, something worth killing for. "The evidence," Sam said. "Do you have it?" Sarah nodded. "Hidden in a place Caldwell will never find it. But we need to get it to the territorial marshal in Phoenix. Problem is, between here and there, half the bounty hunters in the territory will be looking for you." Jose approached Caldwell's prone form, kicking the man's gun away. "He is alive, but not for long without medical attention. What do we do with him?" It was a question that cut to the heart of everything. Caldwell deserved to die for his crimes, but killing him in cold blood would make them no better than he was. On the other hand, letting him live meant he'd continue hunting them. Patience spoke up, her voice stronger now. "There's something else. Caldwell's been selling information to Apache war parties, telling them where to find undefended settlements in exchange for captured slaves. My master thought I was too stupid to understand English when he and his men talked business." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. If true, it meant Caldwell wasn't just a cruel slave owner. He was a traitor to his own people, responsible for the deaths of countless innocent settlers. Jose's face darkened. "My brother's family was killed in an Apache raid 6 months ago. The warriors knew exactly where to strike, when the men would be away." Sam looked down at the wounded man who'd orchestrated so much suffering. Caldwell's eyes were open, aware, defiant even in defeat. "You can't prove any of it," he gasped. "It's the word of slaves and half-breeds against a white man of standing." "Maybe," Sam said. "But I don't think you'll be around to argue the point." He wasn't planning to execute Caldwell in cold blood. But the desert itself provided a more poetic justice. Sam took the man's weapons, his water, and his horse, leaving him exactly as he'd left Patience, bound to a post with just enough slack to prolong the inevitable. "The vultures will find you before anyone else does," Sam told him. "But maybe someone will come looking. Maybe they won't. That's between you and God now." As they prepared to leave, Patience's labor pains began. The timing couldn't have been worse. They were still a day's ride from the nearest settlement. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, and somewhere behind them, Caldwell's screams were attracting scavengers both human and animal. Sarah proved to be a capable midwife, having helped deliver babies on isolated homesteads. Jose and the elderly man, introduced as Solomon Freeman, a former slave who'd earned his freedom and now helped others find theirs, kept watch while Sam tended to the horses and tried not to pace. The baby arrived just as the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson. A girl, healthy and loud, her cries echoing off the rocks like a declaration of independence. Patience wept as she held her daughter, and Sam found himself fighting back emotions he'd thought buried with his sister. "What will you call her?" Sarah asked. Patience looked up at Sam, then at the vast sky overhead. "Liberty," she said. "Her name is Liberty." They made camp among the rocks that night, taking turns at watch duty. Sam found himself paired with Jose during the midnight watch, the two men sharing coffee and conversation beneath a canopy of stars. "You know," Jose said quietly, "there is more to this story than what that girl has told you." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "Patience. She is not just any escaped slave. Her father was a free man, a teacher in New Orleans. He was murdered by Caldwell's men when he tried to buy his daughter's freedom. The papers he had, proving her rightful status as a free woman, they were destroyed. So she was never legally a slave? Not according to the law, no. But Caldwell had money and influence. Who was going to challenge him? Jose took a sip of coffee. That is why the railroad is so interested in her case. She represents something bigger than just one person's freedom. Sam stared into the fire, understanding dawning. If her story becomes public knowledge, it could change everything, Jose agreed. But only if she lives to tell it. The next morning brought fresh challenges. Torres, despite his wound, had escaped during the night. That meant Caldwell's other men knew where they were, and reinforcements would be coming. Worse, Patience was in no condition to travel hard with a newborn baby. It was Solomon who provided the solution. There's an old mission about 6 miles north, he said. Abandoned, but the walls are still good. If we can reach it, we can hold off an army if we have to. They rode slowly, carefully, with Patience cradling little Liberty and Sam's eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The mission, when they reached it, was exactly as Solomon had described, a crumbling adobe structure with thick walls and a clear view in all directions. But they weren't the first to arrive. Deputy Marshal Robert Kane sat his horse in the mission's courtyard, his badge gleaming in the morning sun. Behind him were 6 more riders, all wearing the tin stars that marked them as territorial lawmen. Sam's hand moved toward his gun, but Kane raised his hand peacefully. Easy, Hartwell. We're not here to collect Caldwell's bounty. Then why are you here? Kane dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He was a big man, built like a blacksmith, with kind eyes and a reputation for fairness. Because Miss Hutchins here sent word to Phoenix about evidence regarding the murder of Deputy Hendricks. And because the territorial governor is very interested in certain allegations about Marcus Caldwell's business practices. Sarah stepped forward, producing a leather satchel from her saddlebags. Everything's here, Marshal. Letters, bills of sale, correspondence with Apache chiefs. Tommy died gathering this evidence. Kane examined the documents with growing amazement. Jesus Christ, he muttered. Caldwell's been selling slaves to the Apache, then buying them back for resale. And the information about settlement routes makes him responsible for the deaths of dozens of innocent people, Sam finished. The marshal nodded grimly. More than enough to hang him, if we can find him. About that, Sam said. He's about 8 miles south of here, tied to a post. Might still be alive if you hurry. Kane's eyebrows shot up. You left him in the desert? Same way he left her, Sam replied, nodding toward Patience. Seemed fitting. Over the next hour, the full scope of Caldwell's crimes became clear. The evidence Tommy Hendricks had died gathering painted a picture of systematic brutality that went far beyond simple slave ownership. Caldwell had been running a criminal enterprise that spanned 3 territories, involving murder, treason, and crimes that made Sam's stomach turn. But the biggest revelation came when Kane produced a final document, a confession signed by David Caldwell before his death. Your friend Deputy Hendricks wasn't just investigating Marcus Caldwell, Kane explained. He was investigating David too. Turns out the boy had a conscience after all. The day before you killed him, he'd signed a full confession detailing his father's crimes. He was planning to turn state's evidence. Sam felt the world shift beneath his feet. Then why did he draw on me? Kane's expression grew sad. According to his confession, he knew his father would have him killed rather than let him testify. He was looking for a way out that wouldn't make him look like a coward. You gave him an honorable death, Hartwell. He died knowing his confession would eventually bring his father to justice. The irony was overwhelming. Sam had spent 3 months running from a murder charge for killing a man who'd wanted to die, while the real killer, Marcus Caldwell, had used his son's death to cover his own crimes. But the story had one more twist waiting. As they prepared to ride for Phoenix with their evidence, a dust cloud appeared on the southern horizon. A lone rider, pushing his horse hard across the desert. As the figure drew closer, Sam recognized Torres, the wounded gunman who'd escaped in the night. But instead of coming to fight, Torres rode straight to the mission with his hands raised high. Marshal, he called out in heavily accented English. I have information. I want to make a deal. Kane allowed him to approach, though Sam and the other men kept their weapons ready. Torres looked haggard, his wounded arm bound with strips torn from his shirt. "Caldwell, he is not dead," Torres gasped. "I found him this morning, cut him free. But he is dying, and he knows it. Before he goes, he wants to make one last deal." "What kind of deal?" Kane asked suspiciously. "He has gold, much gold, hidden in caves east of Tucson. Enough to buy an army. He says he will tell you where it is if you let him die peacefully, not at the end of a rope." Kane considered this. "And if we refuse?" Torres shrugged. "Then the gold stays hidden, and maybe his other associates use it to continue his work. There are more like him, Marshal. Men who see the changing times and want to profit from the chaos." It was a devil's bargain. Justice demanded that Caldwell hang for his crimes. But the gold could fund schools, hospitals, legitimate businesses that would help heal the wounds he'd inflicted. Sam looked at Patience, who was nursing little Liberty in the shade of the mission wall. "What do you think?" Patience was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. Finally, she spoke. "My father used to say that sometimes the best revenge is living well. If that gold can help other people find freedom, then maybe Tommy's death and all this suffering will mean something." Kane nodded slowly. "We'll hear what he has to say." They found Marcus Caldwell propped against the same post where he'd left Patience to die. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. He was indeed dying, internal bleeding from Sarah's bullet, exacerbated by dehydration and exposure. But his mind was clear, and his eyes still held their malevolent intelligence. "Come to gloat?" he asked as they approached. "Come to listen," Kane replied. "Torres says you have something to tell us." Caldwell managed a laugh that turned into a coughing fit. "I'm a businessman, Marshal. I understand when a deal has gone bad. The gold is yours if you make me one promise." "I'm listening." "The girl," Caldwell's eyes found Patience. "And her child. I want your word they'll be protected. Not because I've grown a conscience, but because—" He paused, struggling for words. "Because they represent something I tried to destroy and failed. Maybe that's worth something." It was the last thing anyone expected. Marcus Caldwell, architect of so much suffering, asking for protection for his victims. But as Sam studied the dying man's face, he understood. This wasn't redemption. It was the final play of a master manipulator, trying to control his legacy even from the grave. "The gold," Caldwell continued, "is in a cave system 10 miles east of Tucson, near Devil's Backbone Ridge. You'll need the map in my saddlebags and the key I wear around my neck. But I want that promise first." Kane looked at Sam, then at Patience. "What do you say?" Patience approached Caldwell slowly, little Liberty in her arms. For a moment, master and slave, or former slave, stared at each other across an impossible gulf of experience and understanding. "I don't need your protection," Patience said quietly. "But I'll pray for your soul, because someone should." Caldwell's eyes widened slightly, as if her words had struck him harder than any bullet. He fumbled with the chain around his neck, removing a small brass key. "The map in the saddlebags." Those were Marcus Caldwell's last words. He died as the sun reached its zenith, alone in the desert he'd used as a weapon against others. The gold was exactly where he'd said it would be, enough to fund a dozen schools or hospitals. More importantly, his records contained the names and locations of other slavers and criminals throughout the territory. The evidence would lead to arrests and convictions that would echo for years. But for Sam, the real treasure was simpler. 6 months later, he stood on the porch of a small ranch house outside Phoenix, watching Patience teach Liberty to take her first steps. The baby was walking early, another sign of the strength that ran in her bloodline. Nearby, Jose was breaking horses while Sarah worked in the garden she'd planted behind the house. The charges against Sam had been dropped, his name cleared by Tommy's investigation and Caldwell's own records. The territorial governor had even offered him a marshal's position, but Sam had declined. He'd had enough of badges and the compromises they required. Instead, he'd used his share of Caldwell's gold to buy land, good land with water rights and room to grow. Patience worked as his housekeeper and bookkeeper, her education making her invaluable in dealing with suppliers and buyers. It was a fiction that satisfied the law and public opinion while hiding the deeper truth. They'd become family in the way that mattered most. "Sam," Patience called from the yard. "Liberty's asking for her uncle again." Sam grinned and headed toward them. The baby couldn't actually talk yet, but she always reached for him when he appeared, her dark eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. As he lifted Liberty into his arms, Sam reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. He'd come to the desert to escape his past and found instead a future worth fighting for. The ghosts that had haunted him were finally at rest, replaced by the living warmth of the family he'd chosen. The desert had tested them all, with heat and thirst, with violence and betrayal, with impossible choices that revealed the true character of everyone involved. Some, like Caldwell, had failed that test spectacularly. Others, like Tommy Hendricks and the brave souls of the Desert Railroad, had passed it at the cost of their lives. But Sam and Patience had done something rarer. They'd survived it together, their separate struggles becoming a shared strength that could weather any storm. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Patience spoke softly. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd ridden past that post?" Sam considered the question seriously. "Every day," he admitted. "But then I look at Liberty, and I know everything happened exactly as it was supposed to. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts." Sam's voice was quiet but certain. "The desert doesn't make anything easy, but it makes everything clear. What matters, what doesn't. Who you really are when everything else is stripped away." Patience nodded, understanding passing between them like a secret. They'd both been tested by the harsh realities of their time and place, forced to make choices that revealed their true nature. They'd chosen compassion over convenience, justice over safety, hope over despair. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the sound echoing off the mountains. Soon, other voices joined the first, creating a symphony of wildness that spoke to something primitive and eternal in the human soul. Sam pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders and settled back in his chair. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, drought or flood, market prices or government officials, the thousand small struggles that defined frontier life. But tonight, they were safe. They were together. They were free. And in a land where freedom was often bought with blood and measured in the distance between one water source and the next, that was everything. The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of rain. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called to its mate, and Liberty stirred in her mother's arms, dreaming whatever dreams come to those born free under an endless sky. Sam closed his eyes and listened to the night sounds of his chosen home. He'd been many things in his life: soldier, rancher, lawman, fugitive. But sitting here on this porch, surrounded by the people who'd become his family, he knew he'd finally found the role that fit him best. He was Sam Hartwell, protector of the innocent, guardian of the Desert Railroad's most precious cargo, and father to a little girl whose first word would be freedom, spoken without fear. The story could have ended there, with justice served and villains punished, with love triumphing over hatred and good defeating evil. But life, Sam had learned, rarely provided such neat conclusions. 2 years later, on a morning when the desert bloomed with wildflowers after an unusually wet spring, a stranger rode up to their ranch. He was a young man, well-dressed and educated, with the soft hands of someone who'd never done hard labor. His horse was expensive, his gear new and clean. "Mr. Hartwell?" the stranger called out. "I'm looking for Samuel Hartwell." Sam emerged from the barn where he'd been shoeing a horse, wiping his hands on a rag. "You found him. What can I do for you?" The young man dismounted nervously. "My name is James Caldwell. Marcus Caldwell was my uncle." The name hit Sam like a blow, but he kept his expression neutral. "I'm sorry for your loss." James Caldwell shook his head. "Don't be. I know what kind of man he was. That's why I'm here." He reached into his saddlebags and withdrew a thick envelope. "When my uncle died, I inherited his estate. Along with it came certain responsibilities. Debts that needed to be paid, wrongs that needed to be set right." Sam took the envelope warily. Inside were official documents, deeds, bills of sale, legal papers that made his head spin. But the gist was clear. James Caldwell was deeding ownership of his uncle's entire Arizona holdings to a trust fund managed by Sam and administered by the territorial government. The money would go toward building schools and hospitals, with a special provision for the education of former slaves and their children. "There's more," James continued. "My uncle kept detailed records of everyone he'd wronged, everyone he'd sold, everyone who'd suffered under his authority. I've spent 2 years tracking down survivors and their families. Where possible, I've made financial restitution. Where that wasn't enough," he gestured toward the papers, "I've tried to ensure their children will have opportunities my uncle denied them." Sam stared at the young man. "Why?" "Because," James said simply, "someone in my family needed to choose differently. My uncle believed that power gave him the right to treat other people like property. I believe power gives you the responsibility to protect those who can't protect themselves." It was then that Patience emerged from the house, carrying 3-year-old Liberty on her hip. The little girl had grown into a beautiful child with her mother's intelligence and her adoptive father's stubborn streak. She could already read simple words and had a habit of asking questions that made adults laugh and think in equal measure. James Caldwell's face went pale when he saw them. For a moment, the family resemblance was unmistakable. He had his uncle's pale eyes and aristocratic features. But where Marcus Caldwell's eyes had held cruelty, James's held genuine remorse. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat, "I know words can't undo what was done to you. But I want you to know that my uncle's crimes died with him, and that there are those of us who believe every child deserves a chance to write their own story." Patience studied him carefully, her arm tightening protectively around Liberty. "You look like him," she said finally. "I know. It's a burden I'll carry all my life." "Good," Patience replied, surprising him. "Burdens make us stronger, if we choose to carry them right." James smiled sadly. "You're more generous than I deserve. But there's one more thing." He reached into his vest and withdrew a small, worn book. "This belonged to your father. I found it among my uncle's papers." Patience's hands trembled as she took the book. It was a collection of poetry by Frederick Douglass, inscribed on the first page in faded ink, "To my beloved daughter Patience, may you always remember that words have the power to break chains. With all my love, Papa." Tears streamed down her face as she pressed the book to her chest. Sam moved to her side, his arm around her shoulders, as Liberty reached up to touch her mother's tears with tiny, curious fingers. "Thank you," Patience whispered to James. "You don't know what this means." James nodded and remounted his horse. "Actually, I think I do. My uncle spent his life taking things from people. I'm trying to spend mine giving them back." As the young Caldwell rode away, Sam felt a strange sense of completion. The circle that had begun with cruelty and suffering had ended with justice and redemption. Not the simple justice of a bullet or a noose, but the deeper justice of a man choosing to be better than his bloodline. That night, as they sat around their dinner table, a real table now, in a real house with glass windows and painted walls, Patience read aloud from her father's book. Liberty sat in Sam's lap, following along with her finger even though she couldn't yet read the words. "Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced," Patience read in her clear, strong voice, "neither persons nor property will be safe." Sam thought about those words as he tucked Liberty into her bed later that evening. The little girl was growing up in a world still full of injustice and hatred, but also in a world where people like Jose and Sarah and even James Caldwell were willing to fight for something better. "Uncle Sam," Liberty said sleepily, using the title she'd invented for him, "tell me the story about the desert." It had become a bedtime ritual, the tale of how they'd all found each other in the wilderness, though Sam edited out the darker details for young ears. In his version, it was a story about lost people finding their way home, about strangers becoming family, about the desert that tested everyone but rewarded those who proved worthy. "Once upon a time," Sam began, settling into the chair beside her bed, "there was a cowboy who thought he was lost." As he spoke, Sam could hear Patience moving around the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner and preparing for tomorrow. Through the window, he could see the lights of Phoenix growing brighter each year as the territory developed and civilization crept steadily westward. Change was coming to the desert, railroads and telegraph lines, proper schools and churches, law and order that didn't depend on the fastest gun or the deepest pockets. Some of that change would be good, some less so. But Sam had learned to take each day as it came, to find meaning in the small victories and simple pleasures. Liberty's breathing grew deep and regular as sleep claimed her. Sam kissed her forehead and quietly left the room, joining Patience on the porch where she sat reading her father's book by lamplight. "Good story tonight?" she asked without looking up. "The best kind," Sam replied, settling into his chair. "The kind that ends with everyone safe at home." Patience smiled and continued reading, her lips moving silently as she absorbed words that had been forbidden to her for most of her life. Liberty's cradle sat nearby, rocking gently in the evening breeze. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the desert, the new railroad line that now connected Phoenix to the outside world. Soon, Sam knew, this would be a different place. The wild frontier that had shaped them all would give way to towns and laws and the kind of civilization that made stories like theirs seem impossible. But tonight, under a sky full of stars that had witnessed countless struggles and small triumphs, the desert still held its ancient power. It was still a place where a man could reinvent himself, where justice could be found outside courtrooms, where families could be forged from the most unlikely materials. Sam reached over and took Patience's free hand in his. She squeezed back without looking up from her book, a gesture so natural and comfortable it might have existed for decades instead of just a few years. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and rain clouds building on the horizon. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its pack, and other voices answered, a wild chorus that spoke of freedom, survival, and the endless possibility of tomorrow. Sam closed his eyes and listened to the night symphony of his chosen home. He'd been many things in his life, but sitting here on this porch, surrounded by the family he'd found in the most unlikely place, he knew he'd finally discovered who he was meant to be. The cowboy who'd thought he was lost had been found. The slave who was never truly enslaved had claimed her freedom. The baby born in the shadow of injustice would grow up in the light of possibility. And in the desert that had tested them all, their story would become legend, whispered around campfires and passed down through generations, a reminder that even in the harshest places, hope could take root and flourish. The desert's promise had been kept.